Can anybody hear me okay, or is this thing started yet, or what? Wonderful. Thank you, guys. You're very quiet. Is anyone actually talking there or no?
No, we're not doing much, just sitting around right now, just figuring out what's going on, but we'll get to it when we get to it.
Well, I'm glad to see your happy face, Mike. Thank you.
And started.
I think we're just setting up some of the final details and then we'll call the meeting to order.
Perfect. Thank you.
There we go. Well, I will get started. Welcome everyone to our 2024 Emergency Program Executive Committee. Because it is our first meeting of the year, we have a couple of procedural things to run through, which is why I am opening up this meeting. We have the election of the chair and the vice chair that needs to be conducted as part of the process for the first meeting of every year. And we will get to that in short order. I'll start by calling this meeting to order and recognizing that we are conducting today's business on the traditional territory of the Tshot and Huipetsheshet Nations. And we're grateful for that fact. I will give notice to participants that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube and will be on the Regional District website. And so I will also flag that we will do, before we do any introduction, or actually, if it's okay, Heather, I will do introductions. I know it's not explicitly on there, but I think it's important for us to know who's in the room and also who's online. And after the introductions, I will hand it over to our Manager of Administrative Services to walk us through the process for the election of the chair and vice chair. So I will start to my left, if that's okay. Mike, if you hit the button, introduce yourself.
Hello, everybody. Mike Fox, City of Port Alberni, CIO.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Karen Freeby. I'm the Protective Services Manager with the ACRD.
I'm sorry, Heather Zenner, Manager of Administrative Services.
Mike Sparrow, Regional Rep for Cherry Creek.
Good afternoon, Aklama Penny-Cote. I'm the Electoral Area Director for Sprout Lake. Thank you.
Cindy Solda, City of Port Alberni, City Council.
Good afternoon, Cynthia Dick, General Manager of Administrative Services.
Thank you. And Bob, I will go to you, Bob Beckett.
Good afternoon, everyone. Bob Beckett, Area A, Banfield.
And Susan Roth.
Susan Roth, Area E, Beaver Creek.
And Fred.
Fred Boyko, Area Bravo for Beaufort, Electoral Area Director. Thank you.
Thank you. And Charlie, I realize you are there. You want to say hi?
Charlie Sterrett, Regional Fire Service Manager. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you. So as noted, we have some housekeeping, and so I will, or some procedural necessities here. If it's okay, I'll hand it over to you, Heather.
Thanks, Daniel. Okay, so we're going to conduct the election of the chair for the Emergency Program Executive Committee. Because we're holding this meeting via Zoom and in person, for the folks in the room, if there's an election, I will leave the room and print out ballots for you. You'll fill out the ballots and then return them to me. For those online, if we do have a vote, I'm going to ask the three of you to email me at hzenner@acrd.bc.ca your confidential vote. And then myself and Cynthia will leave the room to go count the votes, and then we'll return and announce who is the chair. So I would like to call for nominations for a chairperson of the Emergency Program Executive Committee for 2024 for a first time. I'm going to nominate Bob. Director Beckett, do you accept the nomination?
No, and I appreciate being nominated. However, it's just a personal thing where I feel that the chair does a better job when they're present in the boardroom, and that's my rationale. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Beckett. So I'll call for nominations for a chairperson for the emergency program for 2024 for a second time.
Madam Chair, I'd like to move Mike Sparrow for chair.
Thanks. Director Sparrow, do you accept the nomination?
Yes, I will accept the nomination.
Thank you. And I will call for nominations for a chairperson of the Emergency Program Executive Committee for 2024 a third time. Okay, there being no further nominations, I hereby declare Director Sparrow the chair of the Emergency Program Executive Committee for 2024. So now I will move on to vice chair election. So I'll call for nominations for vice chair for the Emergency Program Executive Committee for 2024 for a first time.
I'll nominate Cindy Solda.
Director Solda, do you accept the nomination? Thank you. And I'll call for nominations for vice chair for a second time. And finally, I'll call for nominations for vice chair for a third time. There being no further nominations, I declare Director Solda vice chair of the Emergency Program Executive Committee for 2024. So that is all I have. I will turn it over to you, Director Sparrow, to carry on. Yeah.
Thank you for that and for your confidence in me. I will do what I can to dispel that. I'd like to call this meeting to order. You've already done that, right? Recognized? Okay, election of chairpersons. Approval of the agenda. You approve the agenda for you? You guys have copies of the agenda over there? Or do you want copies of the agenda?
I'll move the agenda.
Some of the agenda and seconder. Okay, seconded by Director Cote, moved by Councillor Solda. All those in favor of the agenda? All those opposed? Agenda is approved. Any declarations or conflicts of interest? Hearing none, we'll move on. There are no previous minutes because this is the first meeting. Is that correct? Correct. Okay. We go into presentations. Presentations, emergency program overview, PowerPoint presentation, Kay Freedy, Protective Service Manager, and Daniel Sion, Chief Executive Officer.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being here today. I do have a presentation. I will share my screen, but when we share our screen, I will no longer be able to see the folks who are on Zoom. So if you would like to make a comment or you have a question, please just interject and I will stop sharing my screen and we can have a conversation. So there we go. if this works. That's good. Okay. So just a brief overview of the agenda. I'm going to start off by chatting a little bit about disaster and emergency management. We'll talk about the Emergency Operations Center and the roles and responsibility of the policy group within this EOC. And I'll provide an update of the emergency management program and end with a discussion about communications and spokesperson. And this meeting is certainly intended to have discussion. So if at any point you'd like to discuss any of the slides, please, like I say, please jump in. Oh, and I can see folks online, so that's good. So please jump in at any time. So the first slide is just talking about the emergency management structure in Canada. And you'll notice where, and I wanted to bring to your attention, oh, that's okay. And I particularly wanted to bring you to your attention to where the EOC sits. So that star that you see, that's where we sit on this chart. So on the left-hand side, you'll see the federal government, and then you'll see where we sit as a local authority. And when we're needing support and help, we look towards EMCRs, so the Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, for support. And then there's a number of links as we move up the structure here. The biggest takeaway, I think, from this slide is just that emergency management framework in Canada is collaborative and it shares responsibilities from all levels of government. Yeah, please.
I'll just add as well that depending on the nature of the emergency, in some cases, the emergency will start at a site location. We'll declare the state of local emergency and connect to the province, in which case then we're leading the process of dealing with an emergency being supported by the province. In other instances, which we've seen a little more frequently now, is the province actually states a provincial state of emergency. When that occurs, we're actually supporting them at a local level, implement various elements, but they are actually the lead on the emergency. And it's just important nuances, right? When we see some of these differences, it doesn't mean that we're not acting locally and communicating locally, but it does change our role in terms of how we lead or how we support.
Yes, and I have in my notes here, so I'll just follow up that, the federal government provides leadership at a national and international level, but local authorities are almost the first to often respond because often emergencies are happening at a local level. So Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness. So this is the lead coordinating agency in emergency management in BC, and they are responsible for overseeing systems such as Emergency Info BC, Prepared BC, BC Emergency Alerts, ESS program, Disaster Financial Assistance program, and the Provincial Emergency Plan. So they provide 24/7 support, and they work with local governments, First Nations, non-governmental organizations, volunteers, the public, and really provide guidance and leadership and advice that trickles down to our level at the local level and also out to the public as well. So they're who we look to for guidance in emergency management. And you will likely know this at this point, but I thought it was worth bringing this to everyone's attention that the Emergency Program Act has now changed. It is now called there was new legislation as of November of 2023. So it is now called the Emergency and Disasters Management Act, or EDMA, as we like to call it. And this act really incorporates the guiding principles, goals, and priorities of the Sendai framework. It includes the best practices from international research. It incorporates a lot of risk mitigation, highlights collaboration between all levels of government, private industry, NGOs, and the public. It really works to provide engagement from all levels of society. It incorporates risk-informed decisions and focuses on local readiness. It also includes foundational pieces from DRIPA, and so it recognizes the rights of Indigenous people, incorporating cultural safety practices and traditional knowledge in emergency management plans. and really emphasizes collaboration and promotes the development of joint decision-making. So in this new legislation, you will see these pieces, these foundational pieces woven within EDMA. So this act sets out our responsibility that all local authorities have and ones we must follow. And so each local authority must establish a emergency management organization to develop and implement emergency plans and other preparedness, response, and recovery measures. The pieces in blue there are new with the new legislation. So we're now looking at all 4 phases of emergency management. So mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. I would say historically, we've done a pretty good job of preparedness and response, but we are now shifting our focus to also include mitigation efforts and sustainable disaster recovery as well. And we are also, the new legislation is really emphasizing emergency plans and risk assessments incorporate risk drivers such as climate change and also traditional knowledge. Yes, please.
On this slide here, local authority responsibilities, that it's regional district, does that include the city as a local authority too? Or are they relying on us?
So we do have an agreement with the city, so we provide service to them. However, they are a local authority having responsibilities as well. So they have their responsibilities, we have ours. We coordinate and share staff on efforts, and we just find that it's more cost effective in doing so. This is part of why we have this committee, is that we're actually working in unison together. And of course, that presents its challenges. And this is one of the mitigations to those challenges, is that collaboration requires good communication and joint dialogue. And this is why you have us in this format.
So does that also include the West Coast?
So the West Coast has their own. So and what we do is we contract a group of services from Utluit and particularly around fire, but also around some of the ESS work. So it's not the same format with the West Coast. We did explore the development of a service, and the West Coast was not ready to explore that. In Bamfield, we do run Bamfields, and that's part of the regional district service as well. And I think it's in a slide a little bit later on how we break that apart.
Okay, I just one more question then. Why is this called the ACRD emergency program rather than the Alberni Valley and Bamfield?
We could certainly rebrand it.
And sorry, I'll just jump in. We were looking in this, we are combining the Bamfield Emergency Plan and the Long Beach Emergency Plan with the Alberni Valley Emergency Plan to create the ACRD Emergency Plan, which is why it's called that. Yeah.
And of course, the nations, how they can, they have their own separate EOCs. Are they going to try and become more integrated?
Yeah, so the nations have their own, and we do collaborate quite a bit with them. It's also one of the key themes of work that we have this year is making sure that we do more in terms of cultural connectivity. When we talk culture, the nations have a huge portion of that, not the only portion. There are subcultures within our communities as well that we're trying to address. But that is a level of coordination as well that we look at. And depending on the area, we do have different agreements with different nations. But on all fronts, we have as up to date as we can possibly keep them, distribution lists and lines of communication.
So just a quick question. A few years back, when the emergency committee meeting met, there used to be a lot more people at the table. And it used to be people in the community too, and First Nations at the table. So I'm just kind of curious. I see now it's called the executive committee meeting. So does that just mean the people that we see now that's on the invite list, or will that mean some certain people throughout the community?
So, yeah, this committee is different from other committees. So the executive committee is really here just to provide high-level governance and direction with regards to activities that we have. There are other groups that we do have, some that are quite large and do involve the nations, key interested parties and partners like BC Hydro and MOTI and Forestry. So that's different from this. This is really about governance and policy direction. And because we're coordinating together with the city in particular, this is why we have this format so that we can have discussions around these key areas that we ought to be focusing on, or that this committee feels we should be focusing on and help provide that guidance to our programs.
And just so for your awareness, it is coming up on the slide, a breakdown of each of those committees and what the purposes of each of them. That's okay. It's quite all right.
Just one more thing too. Could we get a copy of the presentation sent to us too? Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Just overviewing some of the key policy changes that have come about with EDMA. So as I had mentioned, there is the 4 pillars of emergency management, and that's embedded in EDMA as well. The rights of Indigenous governing bodies, and that's in relation to DRIPA. And so there is a requirement to consult and cooperate with First Nations. We are to take into account cultural safety and traditional knowledge in all of our guidance. And this isn't a requirement, but is strongly recommended the multi-jurisdictional emergency management organization. Essentially, it's to work together regionally to build resilience together. And that's the premise behind that, is that we're stronger together. And we will be looking, so there is a requirement for risk assessments and business continuity plans, and also for critical infrastructure owners, all critical infrastructure owners, to develop emergency plans, risk assessments, and business continuity plans. So these are outlined in our legislation, but there's not necessarily regulations that go along with this just quite yet. So.
Thank you. I think that we may have to change one of the titles here. The rights of Indigenous governing bodies to the rights of First Nation governing bodies, because they are the Indigenous people that are connected to the land. So there's being a definite distinction between Indigenous and First Nations. So I believe that the people that we would be working with would be First Nations. Thank you.
Yeah, and I will just say that's taken directly from emergency management and climate readiness. That's a term that they have embedded in their guidance. So yeah, we can look, or we can make that suggestion to the province. I just wanted to take a moment to go over the 4 pillars of emergency management and just discuss what each of them means. So mitigation are actions taken to adapt, eliminate, or reduce the impact of disasters. There could be structural measures, and this could be things such as dams or dikes and structural measures, as I mentioned, or there's non-structural measures, so such as the building codes or policy or land use planning, so and insurance incentives. So that's really when we start talking about mitigation, that's what we're discussing. Preparedness is slightly different. It is taking risk reduction activities that aim to build capacity, reduce vulnerabilities, and enhance community resilience. So this is our outreach program, our campaigns, some of the things we do on social media, and where we're really trying to educate the public and provide materials to get them ready for the event of an incident. And response, so this is predominantly focused on immediate and short-term needs. This is when the incident has happened and we're now in the full swing of things, and we're relying heavily on our systems, our key policies, guidance, and documents that already pre-exist, such as the incident command system. And recovery. Now, recovery is often thought of at the end of an event, but recovery really starts just as the event starts. So we're already looking at recovery measures as the event is happening. And so we're looking at restoring and enhancing the livelihoods, health, social, economic, physical, cultural, and environment well-being of our communities. And so this is often an opportunity to try to build back better. If things are destroyed, perhaps we could rebuild in a way that provides more resilience. So there's a term that called build back better to try to emphasize sustainable recovery efforts. some of our best practices in emergency management, and this is really guidance coming from the Sendai framework, so it's international best practices, but to take an all hazards approach. And it's, before I get into that, actually, it's important to just remember that disaster impacts are not uniform across society. So everyone feels disasters differently due to their vulnerability and some folks might be more vulnerable than others in certain disasters, and that might depend on the hazard. And so it's just important to know that the level of risk is different for different people in our society. And so an all hazards approach looks at operational structures and responsibilities, but it doesn't detail the hazard specific activities. So that's why it's called an all hazards approach. It's an approach that kind of bridges all the different types of hazards that could happen. Emergency management, we need to look at an all sector integration. Every domain has a responsibility to improve resilience. And you can see that climate change is a good example of affecting all the domains. So it's important that when we are thinking about emergency management, we think about it from a number of different ways. Whole of society collaboration. So emergency management is a shared responsibility between all levels of government and members of our society. We need to leverage existing relationships. It's built on foundation of partnerships, and collaboration is really key. And so the more voices at the table, often the better in our decision making. Regional and community resilience. First response is almost always going to happen at a local level. So there's an emphasis on local authorities building resilience and empowering community members and organizations to prepare. This requires us to strengthen our social vulnerabilities, focus on social networks and social capital, and really looking at our strength-based approach to focus on our assets and capacities and our capabilities in our community. It's important that we're guided by risk-informed, evidence-based hazard trends. And so this is where risk assessments are founded in, is that what is the evidence that we're seeing and where are we going, and to try to start reducing our risk for what we know is coming. Collaboration and partnership. It's been shown that building our social capital is a really important way to increase resiliency. And this might not be what you necessarily think it would be, because it's not necessarily even just groups like this. This is church groups, sport organizations, and volunteer groups, social service groups, lots of groups where people connect and build relationships. Those types of groups will really help build emergency resilience. And so we often don't think about that, but it's really important. And training, it's been proven that doing our exercises and training annually will help us in times of response, and certainly in recovery. We'll build that trust, we'll get to know each other, we'll be able to react quicker and have a better response in those moments. And then the inclusion and building cultural awareness to ensure that we have culturally safe emergency management practices. Addressing underlying risk factors that drive vulnerability. So emergency management is really driven by folks who are more vulnerable, and it could be in heat waves, it could be seniors that are more vulnerable, or it could be that you're located in the tsunami inundation zone, which makes you more vulnerable. Depending on the hazard, it might change who is most vulnerable. So just thinking about things that drive some of our vulnerability, whether it be housing or healthcare or aging communities or substandard housing. Those are the types of things that if we work on improving those, it'll essentially enhance emergency resilience as well. And so I managed to get this quote from the United Nations. So for every dollar invested in risk reduction and prevention, $15 can be saved in post-disaster recovery. So it's important to do our mitigation. I'm going to move into Emergency Operations Center. Was there any questions about disaster and emergency management before I move ahead? Yeah, Cindy.
So just some quick questions. So I know we're policymakers, and it's really frustrating being a policymaker when you want to get right into the to the ground floor, and I've been through that with the ACRD and the emergency when we had tsunami warnings and stuff. But where I want to go with this is that through the Justice Institute, there was a whole bunch of courses that were offered back in the day. I'm going back in the day, will that be offered when we talk about training in that? And the Justice Institute, of course, you get a diploma or whatever you want, a certificate at the end of the day of each course, and it was offered to everyone through the city and to the city too as well. And I took them all except for one, which was the finance part of it. But the thing is, will that be offered? Because you talk about training, and if you're new on the ACRD board or council, you don't know. And there was a manual that was offered too. We all had a manual too, to understand that. And if you get called, which some of the counselors did, but they didn't go through the training, they don't know. You get here and you're now what, right? So I'm just wondering if that will be offered to both boards.
Yes, absolutely. There is JIBC courses that are offered and are sponsored through EMCR, and I can certainly provide all those links. And also part of what we're trying to flesh out today is what training are we looking for so that we can start designing some training programs for the policy group as we move forward. Yeah, yeah. Emergency Operations Center. So under legislation, we are responsible to activate an EOC when needed. The EOC is in the basement of the ACRD, and we have workstations set up and on the ready at all times. We also have mobile kits that are stored at Beaver Creek Fire Hall if this building should not survive. We do have an alternate location that we could set up as well. And we would take these EOC kits and set up at a different location. So the responsibilities of the EOC is to set policy and strategic direction, provide site support to the incident commander, help with risk management, help disseminate information, help with communications, coordinating with other agencies, and gathering resources when needed. Yes, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. So we have our kits in this building right here. And if this building falls down because of an earthquake, we don't have secondary kits at Beaver Creek, or do we have secondary kits at Beaver Creek?
We do have secondary kits at Beaver Creek. And Beaver Creek is seismically upgraded for earthquake, which is why they're sitting at Beaver Creek Fire Hall. According to our emergency plan, the following have the authority to activate an EOC. So both of our CIOs, Incident Commander, Fire Chief, RCMP, and the Emergency Program Coordinator. And I wanted to chat a little bit about the Incident Command System. And this is a diagram of a collapsed Incident Command System. So ICS, it is a structure that is used all over Canada. It expands and contracts depending on the size of the event. So under all the bottom boxes there, where it says operations section, planning, logistics, and finance, there's a whole number of different areas that could be activated as well. This is the more condensed version of ICS. This structure is utilized to provide direction and support for the incident commander on site, coordinate with other activities, and manage communications. So the policy group that you'll see up there, that essentially is yourselves, and you would be communicating with the EOC director, which would more than likely be our CIOs here. And then they would be bringing information downstairs. And if I could provide a visual a visual of what an EOC might look here in this building, perhaps as a policy group, you're meeting in the boardroom here, and the EOC is functioning downstairs, and the EOC directors are essentially going up and down the stairs between yourselves and the folks who are in the EOC downstairs, just to provide a bit of a visual of how that chain of command works.
I'm full of good questions and bad ones. So when's the last time someplace in BC actually did a policy group interaction to change the policy for the EOC directors?
So I'm not clear. What do you mean? Sorry.
Okay. Well, that's a good question. So there's a policy group in there, but basically if we don't have the policy beforehand, making policy on the fly is never a good thing. So when's the last time actually somebody's actually made policy on the fly during an emergency?
Okay, that makes more sense for me. Yeah, often in emergencies, you won't have all policies in place to guide, and so there will be on the fly things. Mind you, what you see in this diagram is EOC down, so green box down, everything operational. The EOC director is making the calls and advancing various aspects. Where you see policy stuff on the fly will often have to do with interface with the province, with spending, and with some key decisions, operational decisions that are being made that may have long-term recovery effects. You'll see some dialogue with the policy group. And I would say in many instances, most emergencies that you'll see have on the fly policy group discussions going on. We have a lot of plans. So for the standard things that we've seen, and we've had a lot of close calls. So tsunamis where we're getting ready. We typically follow the script that is there. And where we've seen hiccups is largely on the front of communications. And dialogue back and forth with the policy group. Where we're going to see some further dialogue later on and some considerations for us in the future is things like who is the spokesperson that we want, depending on where the emergency is. And in some cases, if there's an emergency unique to Sprout Lake, Penny would be the spokesperson for Sprout Lake. No one would deny that. But if it's a regional one, is it John Jack? If it's a regional one that impacts the city, do we have more than one spokesperson, and how does that work? That's where we need to have policy discussions, because it's a lot easier to be prepared for the what ifs. And really our last policy where it left off was around the pandemic, and Shari was the spokesperson. And when we saw last summer, the whole region was impacted. John was in an election, so we defaulted back to Shari, but we weren't really well equipped for how best to handle that in terms of depth going beyond. And so those are some of the discussions that we want to have, that we can be better prepared at a policy group level. We won't be able to resolve them today, but we certainly want to make sure that we're planning for how it is that we should do that in the future. So the answer is both. I don't know who has everything thought out. I would venture to say most communities have not thought everything out. And I would also argue that once you think you've thought everything else out, you get something that sends you for a spin.
Director Cote.
Thank you. I've attended 2 AGRIP conferences where I've gotten a lot of information regarding incidents and how to be prepared. The last one was from a police officer, retired from, I'd have to look it up. I can't remember, a small community in the state somewhere where there was a shooting and different type of crisis or whatever, but very similar. You have your EOC, and you need to have that spokesperson prepared and ready. Definitely that's a really important part because you need to be able to calm the community and make those tough decisions, so that I can see where that would all come together. Thanks.
Thank you for that discussion. That was good. So our EOC activation framework, and so just wanted to highlight that who the policy group will depend on where the event takes place. So you can see from this chart, if the event occurs within the city of Port Alberni, the policy group is the mayor, city council, and our city CAO. If it occurs outside of the city, it is the ACRD board and the ACRD CAO. And if it's occurring in both areas, the policy expands to include the mayor, the chairperson, the CAO, and the other CAO, both CAOs. So that is our framework that we use to make decisions around EOC activations. So policy group, roles and responsibilities. The policy group provides overall policy direction. The head of the local authority authorizes the declaration or can rescind the declaration of a SOL, a state of local emergency. They may act as an official spokesperson. They will set expenditure limits. They will share share communication and information with the public and make formal requests from outside or for outside support resources as needed, for example, to the province or federal government. Any questions around those last couple slides? Okay. We'll go into our local framework. So there was a bylaw that was accepted in 2023. So just recently, it developed a regulatory bylaw to all electoral areas in the city of Port Alberni. And it defines the emergency program. It sets out the structure of these committees and appoints an emergency program coordinator and defines spending limits. That there are 3 services in our 3 budget services. So we have the Alberni Valley, which includes the electoral areas in the Alberni Valley and the city. And then there's a separate service for Banfield and one for Long Beach. And this is what we were talking about earlier, Cindy. So this might help clarify this a little bit more. So the bylaw outlines that there is 3 different distinct groups. And so we have the executive committee, which is us here today. And then we have the emergency network, which is, I think, what you were referring to, Cindy, with all the stakeholders sitting at the table. And then there is the emergency program leadership group as well. And we'll go into each one of them as we move along here. So this is our group as we're sitting here today. So the purpose is to consider issues and advise the board on budget, policy, infrastructure needs, and other issues as related to emergency management. It provides strategic direction. This group provides strategic direction, reviews and recommends, makes recommendations to the board as well, and appoints any new board or any new members to this committee. Now, the other group that you were referring to was the emergency network. This group still exists. It meets 4 times a year. And this group primarily is, the purpose behind it is to promote mutual understanding between participating local authorities, emergency response agencies, and others, stakeholders in our community in respect to emergency roles and responsibilities. So it includes our partners, public agencies, industry representatives, ACRD, city staff, and First Nations. And we meet quarterly collaboration. And then lastly, we have the emergency leadership group. This is an advisory group with the purpose to provide a communication link between local authorities as it relates to community emergency planning. And it sets annual goals and objectives and provides leadership as it relates to staff participation. Good. Okay. So just looking at our overarching goals for our program, we really look to take on disaster risk reduction activities and activities that would reduce our community's risks. We look to develop preparedness and risk assessments. We're wanting to build resources so we are more prepared locally. And so if ever the need should be, we can help a neighbor and we can be more prepared to respond quickly locally. We are always looking to develop and train volunteers and staff. We do public education through a number of campaigns throughout the year. We're building our volunteer recruitment and our retention with programs such as ESS. And one foundational principle is just social capital and just the importance of building relationships and networking. And the closer knit we are as a community, the better we will do in an emergency. And of course, to incorporate local and traditional knowledge. Nobody knows how best to be more resilient than the people in our own community. And so it's important that we develop that local knowledge. And so these are some of our objectives in action. We are preparing all the time for our EOC to be activated. So we're on the ready. We have an emergency support services program, a Fire Smart program. We are, as I mentioned, always doing training. We're seeking out grants. We're looking to develop cultural awareness. And we are always trying to prepare our community through public engagement activities. To delve a little deeper into ESS provides short-term basic support to people who've been evacuated from their home due to a disaster and emergency. And so this program offers 72 hours of support for accommodation, food, and clothing primarily, although offers support as well with transportation, incidentals, and emotional support. We do work collaboratively with a number of organizations in our community to help fill the gaps, service gaps between ESS and some other organizations that can offer additional support. And you'll often see ESS, and we're certainly seeing it already up north, that we're opening up reception centers and group lodging sites as needed. So there's different levels of ESS. There's a house fire where we provide ESS and we offer a hotel room, or when it gets a little larger, we're looking at group lodging sites and we're looking at opening up some of our facilities and having folks in there. Yes.
So when we do group lodging, we mainly think about adults, basically, right? We don't think about kids. So, you contact any daycares? Do you have any structure in place that you could probably, get to those daycares to help the children relieve the stress they have too? And what about people that have, limited needs such as mobility? And, or right now we need power generators for people's Wi-Fi and their phones. So those are other things to look at too.
As far as children is concerned, children are under the primary care of their parents, and that doesn't change in an ESS or a reception center. They would be under their care. If a child did show up at a reception center without any parental or guidance, we would be immediately contacting the Ministry of Children and Families, and there are structures in place to ensure safety of children in those until we can reunite them with their parents or guardians. And reception centers, absolutely. We have reception center kits, all of about 10 different locations in the Alberni Valley that has things like power bars, power banks, materials. And I can tell you, we have reception center kits at the Alberni Athletic Hall, Banfield Community School, Beaver Creek Community Hall, Beaver Creek Fire Hall, Cherry Creek Community Hall, Echo Center, McLean's Mill, Sprout Lake Community Hall, Harold Bishop Fire Hall, Trinity Church as well. And so there's already 2 kits in every one of those locations that have starter supplies that get things started. So any of those locations can be used as a reception center. And if need be, we know where those kits are and we can always grab them and relocate them if need be as well.
I'll just add a good example is, I believe it was in winter of 2018 when we had the big windstorms, and we ended up with the roadways being closed in both directions temporarily, but there were school buses on both sides. At the timing of the windstorms and the closure of the highway at the time meant that there were children from Port Alberni that were on the Parksville side and vice versa, and so warming centers were held and the buses were diverted, but the schools worked with the ministry because they're still technically under the care of the schools. And so there was an awful lot of coordination with ESS on both sides at that time. So they are factored in. It's just back to what Karen says, they're typically under the care of their parents, but it does happen where they're not. And last year as well, when there was a few school buses with our highway closures that ended up staying at School District 69 overnight, and the school sort of pitched in that way to continue extending that support, even though it wasn't their kids, but they did help out. I see Fred's hand is up as well.
Director Boyko?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I bring up this old map. I'm sure you guys can see it. So we're talking about warring centers and that. So this is, now that we've actually had incidents, this thing's fairly dated, as in there's no new roads, but we should add in the emergency exits so people know because not everyone knows how to get to Banfield down here in this little corner down here, or how to go up to Horn Lake when someone cuts the gates and decides we need to get out that way. But now that we're talking about warming centers and places where emergency facilities are stored, that should be on this map. I think that's more important than telling people where the little tsunami warning sirens are. That's more applicable to actually helping people out. Thank you.
I can just address that. They're actually intentionally, and you're correct, that map is old, but it is intentionally not publicized where those kits are necessarily held because those reception centers might not be activated. We might choose to activate just one reception center in town, and we wouldn't want people to go to community centers and have no one be there. And so we are prepared to have those centers activated if need be, but it is not necessarily, we wouldn't have enough volunteers and staff to activate all of those centers at the same time. So it is intentional that we don't promote where they all are, if that makes sense.
I think that does make sense, but having something that's publicly supplied and then turned on and turned off, I don't know. People don't know how to get to Beaver Creek Hall when the internet doesn't work anymore. So if we're talking about cell phone communication being shut off, I understand that the rationale behind it's not staffed and we don't want people breaking in, stealing supplies. But if this is a real problem and cell phone communication and internet is shut off, how do you get to Beaver Creek Hall if you've never been there before? How do you get to blah, blah, blah facility? How do you know how to get to Banfield? Everyone's so dependent on internet and Google Maps that people forget how to use things like this. So this could be a much more useful device. Thank you.
That's an excellent point, and I guess the response to that would be that we can update it, and we just have to be careful about how we state what's available, what's not. But to your point, I think we would be able to identify key areas that may be used in the event of an emergency. So if they hear on the radio or through other format, that ultimately this is where reception center is, that map would have those key areas without necessarily overtly delegated them as standing emergency or warming centers, etc. But I think to your point, we could identify these areas that may be used so that if they are activated, people can find them on the map.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. I was just a reminder, when we did have that tsunami warning years ago, the cell phones did collapse for like 6 hours. Yeah.
So we were called in, what Mike is alluding to. I was involved in that, and it was interesting because when I got here, of course, I was wanting to do something, so I was assigned to call the West Coast, and I couldn't even get through. So there was no cell phone service, there was nothing. That was the biggest lesson learned, that no matter what, we could not get through to anyone, because of course, everybody's phoning and saying, hey, have you heard, and it was going across board. So when Director Boyko was mentioning about the phones, well, we won't probably have cell service because of that reason. And also, I believe the fires that are existing now in BC, they're having issues with cell phones and lack of communication because their towers are going from the fires. So my other thing too is I do like the idea of the halls being identified. It doesn't have to say everything, but these are stations, and of course everybody tunes on to the radio, and that's the biggest communication right there. The other thing is the animals. When we talk about the people, but now if there's a fire, is there a backup plan for getting the animals out? And that's been through all the fires we've been hearing about too. So I'm just kind of curious. No.
Yeah, I can answer the animals. So there is a program called CDART that we can activate to help with animals. And they are wonderful. It would take them some time to get here, but they are on the mainland and they are a great service to have. We do also have close partnerships with the SPCA and some other groups in towns as well. We do have an agreement as well with the Fall Fair Association to have animals be brought to the fall fairgrounds if need be. And also just in a meeting this morning, I was in a meeting with the ministry. I need to learn more about it, but there was a meeting with the Ministry of Agriculture as well, who are talking about ways to move livestock if you're actually identified as a farm. And so there is some emergency support services through their ministry as well. So there are, and you're right, animals are a huge concern. If I've learned anything in the last number of years, that almost happens right out of the gates, whether it's a cat or a snake or a horse, they're, you know, it's extremely important to people and they cannot be ignored. And we need to make sure that they're taken care of because, as CDART says, animals, it's not about the animals, it's about the humans, because often folks will not evacuate or do the things that they need to do to save themselves for the sake of their animals. So it's important that we keep that in mind.
And as an example, I know someone who just told me that they ran back into their house looking for 2 cats. And the fire department had to pull them out and say, where are the cats? First, we want to make sure people are fine. And they did find the cats exactly where she said they would be. So yeah, I've heard that.
It is a very important area. And when we look at just beside us last year, I think it was about a year ago, when that was on fire or had the fire, everyone that was displaced, we opened up the ESS here in this ACRD building, but we had quite a number of dogs and cats running around because we didn't have enough kennels and whatnot to contain them. So every time we look at addressing an issue better, I think one of the key constraints that we're all going to have to grapple with is where do we store these additional resources? And if we consider things like no internet and whatnot, we can equip ourselves with things like portable generators and Starlink systems that work remotely. But there again, where do we store it and who do we train and how often do we train? So they're all connected and they're all excellent points to bring up. And I'll stop talking because I'm seeing all the other hands go up.
Thank you. I have Director Cote and I have Director Boyko.
What about me?
Oh, your hand's not up?
Your hand's up? What is?
It's been up for a long time. But that's
Whatever.
okay.
Can't see your hand because the background's too white.
Mm.
See?
So I know that the Agricultural Development and Agricultural Advisory Committee have been working on the animal control, but for farming animals mostly, I imagine. So I think that they're quite well prepared group that would be one of the partners. I'd also like to bring up that we do have an emergency map directions regarding the backside of Sprout Lake. So the Kurt's Crib, I don't believe has been deactivated yet, but I want to bring that up. We need to keep that access open. I know that the province has asked about, talked about their plans coming up, that the consultation portion is closed, but we could still converse with them. So I've asked to make sure that I can have a conversation with them. I want to know where they're at with that deactivation. It's important. I think that a lot of people will be stranded if we don't have a secondary route from the West Coast and people around Sprout Lake. So I want to make sure that happens. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Director Boyko and then Director Roth.
Yeah, I was going to echo what Director Cote just said there. We had a good meeting with the Agricultural Development Committee yesterday. And one of the things that was discussed was animal evacuation. But one of the things for farm animals is you need to have your farm animals registered and numbered before anything will take place. And that includes chickens and things like that, which I know for a fact doesn't happen a lot out here for some of the smaller things. Another thing is I always encourage people to not be dependent on government to help you out. Get your own radios, learn how to do them, get a ham license. And they can be quite effective because you can talk across the whole valley with one of these if you get your ham license. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And Director Roth, thank you for your patience.
No problem. I I've got an email that was sent to me yesterday, and it's regarding all of this, and it's to do with interface fires, which is something that I think is one of the highest risks that we face in this area. I'm just going to read it out to you. It's not very long. The letter writer wants to know, has our fire department had training for interface fires? Our house is on Darnley Road, and our backyard is only yards away from the E and N railway tracks. There's heavy bush and trees along those tracks, and any fire there could pose a serious threat to our homes. We have fire hydrants on Darnley, and I have never seen them tested or training by the fire department on stringing fire hoses across the road and down to the tracks to help protect our homes. Does the fire department even have enough hose to do so? And have the hydrants ever been tested for pressure in the last year? Given how dry it is getting now, we have to be prepared now, not later. I would ask you to put this issue high on your priority list, as there are many homes like ours near heavily forested areas. And that was one of the residents in Beaver Creek that wrote this. I do understand what he's talking about. I worked for the Ministry of Forests for many years and responded. I did the mapping for them. And when there was forest fires or wildfires, they call it now, I went to a lot of those sites all over the province and helped map out the fires. So I can see, it's better to think ahead. That's for sure. Thank you.
Daniel, you want to respond?
I can respond to that. And I have a half drafted email for you, Susan. I just haven't clicked send. I've been in meetings. But ultimately, our fire departments, and specifically addressing Beaver Creek, is fully trained for interface fires. So they do have that. Following last year's work, I mean, one of the things that we did do last year is we did get additional capacity in terms of training and support through the introduction of the paid chiefs, and that has made a difference in terms of that additional attention and preparation. They took part in activities last year across the province. They also came back and shared those experiences and were able to follow up with greater support, more emphasis on training. And I believe we even got a grant that helped us get some additional interface equipment. We also have our mutual aid. And quite often what we see with mutual aid is things like the entire valley depends on Sprout Lake with regard to the cistern truck. I'm probably using the wrong term, but ultimately a lot of water on wheels, and the city has additional equipment. And so where we continue to see collaboration between departments is the more we standardize what we order, the easier it is to put it together if what we have isn't enough. And that's the point of that automatic aid and mutual aid. So every bit of investment makes a big difference.
Also, I'm wondering, do we have radios? And also, do we have a radio operator, someone that's trained to operate it?
Yes, yes, and yes on all of.
Okay, and one other question. This was when my hand wasn't seen really early on. Why wouldn't we hire, or not hire, but why wouldn't we utilize existing communications staff to be our spokesperson? Like I noticed the RCMP do that, and they have a person that's dedicated to it. Like I'm thinking Heather Thompson, she's an expert at communications. Why wouldn't we do that?
That's a great question, and we do. So when we activate an EOC, our communication staff do join that EOC and do take part in terms of often taking on the role of communication liaison. And it only gets better. I mean, last year, I think Port Alberni had just hired, and so the coordination, obviously, for somebody just starting is challenging. I think Karen was on day 2 when we activated that EOC. So there's always some flexibility in who we use. But one of the key themes along those lines, one of the key themes that we are going to have to discuss moving into the future is about how it is that we maintain business continuity of our local governments and avoid burnout. Because the model of utilizing existing staff is a great one. And it's the one that we use, but it's one that was invented when we had emergencies once every 10 years. And now what we're seeing is multiple emergencies every year, and it can be highly disruptive to our ongoing provision of service. And so, we're still running that model, but over time, there's certainly discussions. I know other regional districts in the interior that are getting persistent fires. Their staff are burnt out. And, you run 3 months, a full summer of being part of an EOC. You come out of that and you have a 3,000 email or a few hundred applications to process, and those same staff have to sit back down and be planners again and whatnot, and they're burnt out. So I know that provincially this is going to end up being a bit of a discussion on how to better support and maintain business continuity for local governments as we do what we need to do. I think Mike Fox had a comment though, so before we jump in, if it's okay, Mike Sparrow, I'll hand it over.
Yeah, my comment was just back to the fire departments. We do joint training with all of them. We've done it down in Roger Creek with drafting water, and we've also done high angle where there has been. We pretend there's a fire down in a area that's hard to reach, and we reel out the hose to make sure the fire departments are training. So I know since in the time I've been here, there's been about 3 or 4 joint events with all the fire departments.
Thank you. Councillor Sola?
Yeah, just a couple of questions. First of all, burnout was a big discussion all the time. If there was an emergency and you have to work around the clock, how do you deal with that? And I'm glad it's still on the table, totally. Communication in the past has always been an RCMP. The communication from RCMP member was always the person out there in the public, just to throw that. The other one is there used to be radios and it was given to the main people that or they could purchase one. Are they still available? Like, I know First Nations bought it. I know the Mills used to have it where you kind of slept with it if an emergency went off. The CAOs would have them. This was a long time ago. Like, remember, I'm going from 2002 and on because emergency was my portfolio at the time when we had portfolios.
I'll answer that one. A lot of that, like I remember being an early CAO and still having a pager because that's what we had in case. A lot of that has now been replaced with Voyant Alert, and we do have a notification system through Voyant Alert that can go above your do not disturb and squeal and beep away so that you know. But cell phones to a large degree have replaced that. The radios have a limited range. So for me, a radio won't work. I'm in Qualicum Beach, and we just don't have the repeater towers to do it. Locally, when we do activate, we do have radios that can be distributed if needed. So we are equipped on that front. But yeah, the technology-wise, that has shifted. But if everything else does fail, we do have our ham radio operators, and we can set up that way. So. And I should also flag with burnout as a good example as well. For our policy group, when you're the spokesperson, this is where making sure that we have structure is really important, because you will each, as elected officials, be reached out to by the media. What we need to do better is bring that back in through the EOC and coordinate. So instead of you getting 16 calls from the media, we can actually coordinate a media scrum. Have them all come in at a single point and coordinate. And the same holds true for the Green Vest EOC directors. For Mike and I, we're able to offset each other. Obviously, when an emergency starts, we're all on probably for the first 3 days because we're both trying to figure out the details. But as it prolongs, I will offset Mike, he will offset me. And the same thing needs to hold true when we get to, if Shari, for example, is the spokesperson, who's the next one? Are we ensuring that we're following a process that helps buffer against early burnout? Because as we know from last summer and other instances, many of the emergencies we're seeing now are not a 2-day emergency. They're prolonged.
And just to carry on this part of it. So, I agree with on the burnout, and that's where the table exercises come in. So you can practice that and know that. And we used to have a lot of those table exercises all the time, as well as out, there was a time their ship was in the harbor and we did a table exercise with the ship. How do we deal with that? The other thing too is updating contact lists. There was always that changes constantly. And I know there was a lot of times that list becomes needed to be updated all the time. And how many times do you update that? If it's once every year, that changes really fast. So that's another question I was asked.
I could answer that. There is a master contact list that is distributed within the city and the ACRD and fire chiefs. It's updated twice a year. And we're always, as we hear new information, we are always changing the numbers. It does change a fair bit, as you say, but it's reprinted and we're always updating it, but it's printed twice a year and distributed twice a year.
But that contact list is also with the public. I know at the time when Soldas was open, when we were in the Alberni Mall, that's where a feeding station was, right? So all those little areas and is that updated too,
We do try to do our best to update. There's food services, there's industry, there's health services. There are a number of tabs in this Excel spreadsheet and it's fairly extensive. And as we hear information turning over in our community, we do our best. I'm sure we're missing components because it's hard to keep up with it, but particularly as staff, ACRD and city staff and elected officials and whatnot, turnover, those are always being updated all the time. Yeah.
Thank you. I have Director Roth and then Director Cote.
Okay, I'm curious to know if the ACRD has done a risk assessment on themselves through WorkSafe BC, given that we provide emergency services. So from that perspective, I know the organization that I work for, we were required to do a risk assessment for violence in the workplace. But if you look at it from the nature of the work that the ACRD does, I mean, have they done it?
That makes me think of the business continuity planning that's being put out through EMCR, and that initiative is coming, I would say.
Okay.
The province, it is in legislation and it is asking us to build BCPs, but it hasn't provided any regulations or guidance on this. So a number of my counterparts we're all waiting for that guidance to know what is being required of us. So I would say it's coming. I think you're on the mark there. I would call it a business continuity plan. And I would expect to see it in the next couple of years.
What about also, just while we're on the topic, that great app that you provided me the information with that we can use in where I work? Could you not utilize that more or something like that more with elected officials, or I don't know.
I believe that was that the Voyant Alert app? Oh,
no, it was another one. It was so you could contact your volunteers quickly.
Oh, that's the WhatsApp.
Yeah, it works really well.
Yes, we use the WhatsApp app to contact our ESS volunteers. Yeah, and it is very helpful. And the reason why we use WhatsApp is it works with Android systems and Apple as well. So it is a good functional app to use.
And Director Cote.
Thank you. So, couple of points. Just the messaging when the Dog Mountain fire was happening. The regional district had I think the chair was the spokesperson. Worked well most of the time, but media did reach out to myself as the director. I did a couple of interviews. So the key there is having a constant message. It doesn't really matter if it's the chair or the CAO or the, forget your name, they're the top of the director, the top director, or the director of the area. If the message is the same, you need to put out a written press release that can go out, because you need to have the same constant message, because I've seen it where people are being directed to do different things and it does not work. It confuses people and you end up with mayhem. So a constant message, so that needs to be definitely part of the plan. The continuity, business continuity, MIA is, I think that they have a grant for that actually. Or I know that they've talked about business continuity because they try to help out. So not completely sure. But I know that we've talked about business continuity as part of. Put your mic on.
That was the Cameron Bluffs fire, and they did a business continuity from the provincial government, got involved and did for businesses, not for government though. It wasn't for government and how we backfill. It was about recovery and planning for the next one for small businesses. And I know it's still on the chamber radar, that they're still working through that.
Municipal Insurance Association is for just for local governments, so there might be something there.
Yeah, we can look. I know MIA, we're covered and our volunteers are covered for insurance wise. So that's a different aspect, but I haven't heard anything of them doing continuity planning, but we can look into it.
So when Lytton Fire happened, MIA was reaching out and trying, what can we do? So I know that business continuity was mentioned from the local government point of view, because you're going to still have to try to look after the people, even though they were burnt out as well. So.
Well, I got one little statement before you carry on there. 72-hour support. So one time at the fire hall, we got a bunch of kids dropped off in school bus, 2 tarantulas, a boa constrictor, and a aquarium full of tropical fish. So you don't know which to walk in that door, but there you go.
Yes, I have learned that. I've been caught by surprise a few times, but that's a whole new level. And just for your awareness, later in the slide, in the presentation, we are going to be talking about spokespersons as well and communication sources as well. So it will come up again. Our Fire Smart program. So Randy Thowen is our Fire Smart coordinator, and he has been busily doing many home assessments. There is a rebate program that residents have access to if you go through the home assessment process. He's also doing critical infrastructure assessments. He's doing many public education and awareness campaigns. He's out in markets and open houses in many places trying to educate the community. I do see your hand, Fred. I'll just finish the statement and then I will let you ask your question. And he's doing a number of training opportunities and has developed the Wildfire Resiliency Network. So Randy is extremely busy and things have certainly been ramping up as we move into the summertime here. And I'll give you an opportunity to speak now, Fred.
Thank you. I was just playing with some of the promoted advertisements for the ACRD regarding this program and waste disposal. And when it pops up on the little app here, and and it's just like a little picture of what this, say, waste disposal is. When you click on it, it doesn't let you actually see what it says and just gives you the phone number for the ACRD office. If we want to make this easier for people, the Fire Smart program and removing debris, just let people click on a little picture and expand it to read it, as opposed to forcing people to call the ACRD, because that's just going to bog everything down. Second point, there's no free place in the Alberni Valley to get rid of woody debris. So, for example, I go and clean up my mom's yard in town. I have to pay $10 at Earthland to Sea to get rid of it, or pay $10 at the landfill to get rid of it. Last year, there was free places to get rid of stuff. So you're making it harder for people to get rid of woody debris. And they either have to force to call this program and be available for when these guys show up, or something else. I think that needs to change. Make it easier for people to clean up the yards, make it more fire smart, etc. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate your comment. Just a question. Was that on Facebook that you were referring to that photo?
Yes, I'm trying to find it here. I saw it yesterday and I thought this is kind of silly.
Okay, I'll have a look at it. Thank you.
I got one thing. I'm gonna go with Fred here on this. I've been asking for the same thing Fred just asking for now, and that is to get together for woody debris. I know it's $10 a load and I've taken many loads this year there. All you're gonna do is push them out into the backcountry and we're gonna end up with a bigger risk out in the backcountry. So we gotta find a way if we can to get together. If we partner with the city, because they happen to be here right now, and see if we can find a spot we can dump and chip. Thank you.
Well, I don't want to speak over you, Daniel. Sorry about that. But I believe that there's already a partnership either with the city, but all the landfill stuff already goes through the ACRD because it's on ACRD land and city contributes to paying for it. But like I said, up until February, you could go to Earthland and Sea, get rid of it. And the landfills went from $5 to $10 last year. But yeah, people are just going to throw their stuff in the bush and you're already seeing it more and more.
Yeah, what I was gonna say is the only structured program we have is through FireSmart. And so what we would need to do is explore the development of something different. Because it's one thing to equip the landfill or to work with Earthland and Sea to receive it. But in some instances, it's also about pickup and or chipping. And we would need to have a discussion around how we would want that service to work. I know in Qualicum Beach, it's a program that's part of your tax base, and twice a year it's Public Works that goes around with the chipping trailer for Qualicum Beach and chips and picks up everything. But you know, so it's free for residents, but free I put in parentheses because it's just part of the taxation annually. We would have to. What we haven't done that we would have to do is actually explore what that could look like either as a service or an expanded service to something existing.
Director Boyko, your second question?
Yeah, I can't see my own screen. Can you actually see what I'm looking at on my phone?
No.
Anyways, all right. I was trying to show you the Facebook ad that just gives you a phone number when you clicked on it. All right, thank you.
I think I know the one you're speaking of, so I'll chat to Randy to see if we can get that a little bit more effective. And I just want to bring up that anything that is chippable can be a part of the curbside debris removal program, so people can phone to have that material picked up. I also believe with the FireSmart program, we offer neighborhood. So if a neighborhood wants to get together and FireSmart their neighborhood, I believe as part of that program, we can bring a bin out for debris removal at that point. So that's something we can explore with Randy as well, but that's when a neighborhood collectively comes together.
Thank you for that. Fred, you get your hand still up? Is there? Okay, thank you. And we'll go back to Karen.
Okay, and just a reminder, and we chatted a lot about communication. So we do have, this is a volunteer group. It's the amateur radio club in town. There's about 20 active members and they do meet monthly and are a number of radio operators in our community. So hopefully it never comes to this, because if we're using this group, we're in a very dire situation with a large scale emergency, but they are there. So there is some support, absolutely. And just talking about our emergency preparedness and public education, just for your awareness, we do have the Tsunami Preparedness Week, Hike to High Ground Emergency Preparedness Week, and Shakeout, and we do these events annually. And also we are at a number of markets and fairs and open houses in our community. Our Protective Services Coordinator, as well as our FireSmart Coordinator, are trying to get out into community to engage with the public and promote the need for emergency preparedness. Training, we've talked a lot about training, and this is a list of training that's just happening this year with our grants this year. So we have quite extensive training opportunities happening. We have our EOC Essentials course, our community evacuation. Number of community members from our fire department went to the fire services or FireSmart conference. We went to the ESS conference and as well attending the ESS director course through JIBC. And we are continuing with a number of exercises as well, where we get together with joint agencies and collaborate on how we respond to different types of hazards. And we also at the bottom there had our Fire Smart tabletop exercise as well. So there are a number of training and exercises happening annually, and this is something we would look to do every year because it's certainly important to stay sharp with this information. Yep.
So back to those exercises, it would be a great one to have policy, a policy training program for the policy group, just so they know, even during an election, after an election, have that. It doesn't have to be every year, but just to have, here's what happens here, because nobody knows. I mean, they don't know what happens when you're called, and when you do get that call. The first time I got the call was I was at a cadets, and Tim called me and he said, Cindy, we're calling the policy group. And I went, oh, okay, I'll be there in a minute. I thought it was like a false alarm. And he said, no, we're calling you in. And I said, yeah, I'll be there shortly. I'm just finishing up what I'm doing. And he says, Cindy, we're calling you in. Oh, well, you never seen me leave that building so fast and make a bunch of calls, because there's a lot of seniors I know that can't answer phones or are on the radio, aren't on computer and that. So that's really important to have that dialogue with the policy group. So I just, yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And definitely noted that. I wanted to just provide an overview of the number of grants that we have happening this year as far as emergency related grants. So we have our ESS grant, our EOC grant, our Fire Smart. We have put in application for the public notification grant, which is focusing on a communication strategy. We have yet to, it's pending approval. And we have our Indigenous engagement requirement funding. We've put in a grant for Natural Resources Canada, as well as the Food Security Emergency Planning and Preparedness Fund. So a number of different funding sources trying to all work collaboratively together to make a more resilient Alberni Valley, and ACRD. Yep, sorry.
I'm gonna say, just I read today, Alberta has water shortages for their agricultural sector right now, and they're selling water to each other. So I know we have an agricultural water plan in place, but that's one of the things in the future look at. This enhanced agricultural resilience and preparedness, because they figure they can't put crops in the ground this year because they have no water pump.
So the next couple of slides, I just wanted to bring to your attention, just to note that, we're guided by a number of local, provincial, national, and international leadership, and that we follow the recommendations and the best practices and directed by policy. So these are just a few. I thought might be of interest to just put a few of the guidance that we have. So you can see obviously in blue there's the local, and then in green, this is just some of the provincial guidance that we have. There's many more as well. And international and federal guidance as well. So there is a lot of work in emergency management being done, a lot of documents out there. And if ever you have any interest in learning more, please just let me know. I'm happy to provide links to these documents. And we're getting to our communications here. So just bringing up the Voyant Alert emergency notification system. This system has changed things a lot in the way we do things from the past. And so our policy group would be activated the Voyant Alert system. And so it would be very apparent. It would be a critical alert. You would hear the siren on your phone. This is also how we would provide notification to our public, but also instructions on what to do. So this would say a reception center has been opened at Echo Center located at, and it would have a map that people could go to, and it could be informational if the risk was lower, it could just be more information. But if it was critical, you would hear the very loud noise on your phone.
Sola? Oh, sorry.
It's okay, answer to everything and anything. So my question is, so the emergency notification system goes off, and so how do you notify to set up the emergency center? Like, so the policy group, would we get that kind of a notification and it would just say policy, you're to report? How does that work in the long run?
We have different recipient groups that we can activate. And so the policy group would be a recipient group that would communicate just with that group, or could communicate public wide, or we have one just for ESS, or we have one for staff. And so we have different groups on the ready. And there is a feature within that program where you can reply, where we can set up 4 questions. So we can set up a question that says, are you able to come to the EOC? And we can populate certain answers that says yes, no, within 2 hours or this time frame. And so you would be able to send that information back in just by clicking a button on your phone.
Well, that's nice if your phone's not dead. So anyways, I'm just throwing it out there hypothetically. I like the idea. I like it because not everybody's called to when there's an emergency. So that's great that you can do that. Thank you.
Thank you. I have one question. I remember, Fred's there too. Last time we had the road closures, what I was hearing on the radio and what I was seeing on social media weren't matching. So how do we coordinate? So like people are saying it's open now, and then, the radio says not open now, and then how do we coordinate the two together? Do we have anything in place to help that?
All that information is supposed to go through the information officer in the EOC. It definitely, information is traveling so quickly on so many different platforms now. It is very challenging to stay ahead of communication. In the incidents of the road closure, we were often looking to the Ministry of Transportation to put out information, and we were waiting to put out official information. But certainly people who were sitting on the highway were getting more unofficial information and spreading that information on, AV Chatterbox or different types of platforms. It does become a challenge, and that is one of the training that we try to let the public know. And you can see along the bottom, and that's on a lot of our materials, is what are the trusted sources of information. So the radio is a trusted source of information, but that's not always to say that we're ahead of what's happening out there and what people are going to put out there. But it is important for folks to realize that they need to really follow the trusted sources.
Thank you. And Director Boyko.
Yes, thank you. Everyone was involved with the whole road closure that's in this room and talking, and everybody watching online. They all know everything that happened. Trusted sources are important, but trusted sources need to be sped up and figure things out. If you're stuck in a lineup, or if you're trying to take your mom to the hospital or anything like that, you're going to go to How's the Hump, get the most accurate information and go. So we need to figure out how to make trusted sources more effective and fast, or else they're not going to be useful and no one's going to use them. And that's what happened last year. So it's either going to be better or we're not going to use them. But this Voyant alert, it's nice and pretty, but what happens if you don't have a phone? There's lots of people, lots of old people in Beaufort that do not have phones, and they don't carry their phone and everything else. And what happens when cell phone towers and internet gets taken out? Being dependent on one technology that not everyone has is not always the best solution. Portable radios need to be stressed, whatever they are. Have something like this that can pick up CJV or the Peak or whatever we're calling them now. That's also important. So we got to stress that as well. Thank you.
I can speak to that. As you mentioned, the radio is a partner that we would reach out to, as well as television sources. But this is also a reason why we really stress the personal preparedness and having an emergency family plan. If you have elderly parents who are going to need support and don't have a phone, as a family, that's where you really need to develop a plan to know this, so that within your own circle and network of connections, that you have a plan to help support one another. Really, that's going to happen at that level first. We see that within neighborhoods, neighbors helping neighbors, or family members or friends. And as far as kind of just that, I just want to make mention of the upper level of a Voyant alert, if you will, which is the broadcast intrusive alert, which is the provincial alert, which we can make a request to the province that says we need to send a message, not just to the folks that are registered for Voyant Alert, but to everyone, and that will push through. You would have seen it even recently with the Ready Alert that we just had. That pushes through the TV, the radio, every single person's cell phone, and that is a request we can make through the province.
Thank you. It's good to know that.
Okay. And so we've talked quite a bit about communication, and I think it's really important because I'm sure every debrief in every emergency every time talks about communication or a lack of communication, or we could do better. It's just partly because we're human, and it will always be a challenge, especially when there are so many communication platforms out there. So one of the things, and I'm just going to reiterate something that Cindy had mentioned, was that it's important that we share the content, the messages and the graphics coming from lead agencies without altering them or changing them or making them our own. Leveraging that same continuity of messaging helps provide clear communication and instructions. So it's important as all of us that, we don't recreate messages or try to make something unique, that we take the message from the lead agency, and that could be the Ministry of Transportation, or that could be Island Health, or that could be one of our local authorities, but whomever is sending out, there's a lot of thought that goes into graphics and messaging. And so rather than redesigning it, it's important to have a unified approach. And so we do that with the city and with the ACRD. We try to put out the same messages, and we've been working with our First Nations as well to all have the same messaging. So we're having the same consistent key messages going out to our community. So that is something we're looking at, and something that you mentioned, Fred, we're developing messages. We aim for them to be timely. You're right, people want information fast. We're used to that nowadays, so it is challenging to get that done, but it is very important to provide instructions and accurate information. We aim to provide regular updates and not leave folks too long wondering what's happening. And even if the update is we don't have an update at this time, that is sometimes helpful as well. And to provide simple, clear, and concise messages. We want to maintain our credibility, and during our communication, we want to be empathetic and keep it short and have the messages be consistent. Yeah, absolutely.
So another thing too about the communication part is the face, the trusted face that you're seeing, if you're seeing the same face, like during the Dr. Bonnie, you knew she was going to come out and say something, right? And you, some people didn't trust her, but some people trusted, a lot of people did. And that's important too. You can have the concise message from others and everything like that, but that one face, or if it's because you have to change, if you're working 24 hours, you want to switch it over, but the two faces or whoever it is, it has to be the face too, and you have to trust them.
That was a good segue to the next slide. It's good. There we go, the spokesperson. So the spokesperson may vary depending on the type and location of the hazard. It's not necessarily one person that's always designated as being the spokesperson. There's a number of ways that various approaches. You could have one person or a panel of speakers, and it might be the head of the organization. It could be the information officer. It could be a lead agency. And oftentimes it's subject matter experts, that can specifically speak, whether it's the Public Works Department or the fire chief or RCMP, or, maybe it's from someone from environment, something that is very specific to the emergency at hand. And so those decisions would be made at the policy group. Yeah. And so the attributes, and we've chatted a little bit about it, but as far as a spokesperson, they need to be available. And the benefit of having a panel, and you can see this with Dr. Bonnie, Henry, and Adrian Dix, is like when one of them wasn't there, the other one still was. And so that continuity remained and that trust was still built. And so your spokesperson ideally would be a trusted source of information. They would be recognizable to the target audience, and they'd be relatable. They would be seen as somebody who has, you know, that authority. They would speak with clear communication, and they would be trustworthy and knowledgeable in their area. Often would show calm and composure under what would probably be very intense pressure as well. So, and just that spokesperson, it would be important best practices not to speculate about situations and just the facts at hand, and show some sensitivity as well. So all really important things to think about when we discuss who we would want to be a spokesperson for any of our emergencies coming up.
And I have Director Boyko's hand up again.
Can you see my screen this time?
We can, but it's very small because we have the share screen with the larger one.
So I got
Yeah.
a note here.
Yeah.
That is that I have in front of me whenever I do a board meeting that was provided by a person I care about. And it says, be in control, be calm, and only talk facts. So if you don't, it's exactly what's talking about here. So you don't make up things for your personal agenda. You actually bring out what's true and not. And that's very well echoed on what this spokesperson needs to be able to do. Yeah, control, calm, facts. It's very important. Then people will actually trust what you're talking about and listen to you. Thank you.
Yeah, some of the tips that I wrote down that were provided to me was to address the concerns and the information that the public wants to know, provide clear and consistent messages, use positive language, correct the incorrect. So if we know that there's incorrect information out there, take the time to correct that information. As you mentioned, do not speculate. And to really stress and reassure that the public that safety is the #1 priority and decisions are being made around safety concerns. And to let the EOC, as Daniel had mentioned earlier, let the EOC set up the media scrums and different things and let them take on that burden so that the spokesperson isn't being bombarded with too many requests for media, and we can try to streamline that information. And we saw that really done really well in the West Kelowna fires, actually. If you remember back to the fire chief making a number of media statements, he did a very good job of that. And our last slide is just to talk about training and just ask this group, as we move forward and we try to become better prepared and more resilient, what type of training, you know, and Cindy, you mentioned some of it, what type of training would you like to see so we can better prepare you for emergencies that may come up? And that is the end of the presentation. But not the end of the discussion. Happen to keep discussing.
Councilor Solar, do you have something to say?
I think I've basically said what I felt and what I have had for training as a policymaker. And I think it's really important that others have the opportunity that I have, because when you come into a situation and you're not, well, what do we do for emergency? I don't know, you know, and because I received that portfolio and had that training, and other counselors did too, the odd one when they could. I believe that to me, that's really important, and same as for the regional district too, to understand, because you're not called all the time. You know, the mayor might be called or the chair for the regional district, and you're going, well, why didn't you call me? You didn't call me. But there's different components to the whole emergency, and what the best colors mean and stuff like that. That's really important. I mean, obviously we're going to be up in the boardroom, not down in the ground floor, but it's really important to have some idea what's going on and understand, because it is our community that's affected, and how to be calm. And I wish, you know, like my cell phone came half when I got called in here. I had a half a charge and I'm going, oh God, what am I going to do? You know, like, I guess I could charge it in my car, but you need to know all these things, and you need to be able to, what do you do? You know, and I'm used, again, it was really hard to have my hands tied and not be able to go to the ground floor and help people somewhere, you know, and you need to understand that. And having to go through like the tabletop exercises too was really important, because now if you sit with the financial part of it, and although you're a policymaker, you got to sit in and hear what they have to go through, and then who do they go to, and just the chain of command. The chain of command is really important to note. And all that kind of stuff, sitting through those little exercises and listening to what the next stages are and the changeover. I think, Mike, you were involved in that part of it, probably back in the day too, because you were a fire chief at that point.
A little bit, yeah. Yeah, yeah, I got a lot of diplomas and so yes. Does anybody else have any other questions they'd like? Oh, Susan, Dr. Roth, and then Director Beckett.
Thank you. I just also wanted to point out something that I noticed during COVID with all the messaging. You can overdo it too. So, it really is good to think ahead and not become something that people hate to see. And also one other thing that when I think about it, it is better to have a person that is knowledgeable, that works in the organization, than it does to have a politician. Mostly because there's not a lot of trust. And I'm just saying that just because it's the way it is with politicians. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that. And Director Beckett.
Thanks, Chair. I think when it comes to training, as emergency coordinator for the city of Langford, my responsibility, I felt, was to identify what staff's trainings needs were. And again, we always talked about having to train 3 deep, so that we had, 3 individuals that could take on a particular responsibility, so that you could eventually get them into a shift pattern. But for our board, what I would like to recommend or suggest is that Karen and staff come up with a training matrix, which would be minimal recommended training or basic training to allow us to function and to be aware, similar to what we've just gone through, and then expanded training for those who have additional skills or interests that, whether it be the board chair or vice chair, so that those individuals, if they had the time, interest, could pick up some additional training for additional roles in the event of an emergency. So again, great presentation. I just think that I'm looking for something tangible to bring back to the board, and I'll repeat myself: A, review what type of training matrix we have for our staff, and B, come up with a recommended training matrix, starting off with basic training that could be part of the orientation package for new boards coming in. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Very enlightening. Mike, back to my original question, way back at the start of this, right? We have the EOC for the city probably, and the ACRD, and then we have the nations around here. So we could also expand training that way. So can we draw off of other people's knowledge base without burning ourselves out, right? So we could put in some sort of a memorandum of understanding that if we had to, we could pull from other nations and from the city and do logistics and finance in that way, and not rely only on the ACRD staff, because we should all share the pain and the wills. Thank you.
And I can, a number of those grants that we talk about, it does open up funding for training opportunities, and a number of those grants are with the city and with First Nations. And I can tell you that there's a lot of collaborative training that happens with the city and First Nations. And when we do our exercises, it's almost an open invitation for us all to pool together. We've done training with Sashot Hupachesit, Uchucklassit as well, and we collaborate often with the city, with our city staff. So I just want to reassure you that that is happening, and it is the foundation of all emergency management, and it is how we were going to survive a large scale disaster. So absolutely.
Daniel, you want to say something?
Yeah, like a great example is last summer. I mean, as even though it was a small group of more consistent people, the reality is there was a good rotation. Once we knew that this was more than just 3 days, there was a good rotation, and you know, Mike provided a list of the staff from the city we could draw upon. We had our list, and so we purposefully, every time there was, I think it was on Tuesdays, we did the shift change. We made sure that there was a larger meeting, that information was handed over, and that, you know, very often it was a different, the city taking over where the ACRD was leaving off, and vice versa, just so we could, now that there we were only 2 deep, not 3 deep. But even that just made a big difference for allowing people just some downtime, or what I think was our learning from last summer is it wasn't really downtime. It was just time to go back to your regular job, which was nice because you have the stress of your regular job, but it wasn't downtime. And I think that's where you know, should we encounter similar things this year, being 3 deep and actually having windows of time off is going to be really important.
Thank you for that. And thank you for your presentation, Karen. That was really good and well informed. Hopefully we all learned lots today. So, do we have any correspondence for action information? I've seen down here. No, we don't have any. Request for decisions. This one, request for decision. Emergency Program Executive Committee Terms of Reference Review 2004. Anybody want to make the recommendation? I'm going to read the recommendation.
Do you want to speak to it, Cynthia, or?
Yes, so as a standing committee of the Board of Directors and in accordance with our procedures bylaw, each committee needs to confirm their terms of reference at the beginning or at the first meeting of the year. Any amendments to the committee terms of reference do require approval of the Board of Directors, but the terms of reference have been included in your kits.
Well, thank you for that. I noticed in here from the city, you have one elected official and the mayor or designate is and one de facto person from the large. So, are you the de facto person? Are you the mayor alternate, or do we have to change terms of reference?
No, the designate would be the acting mayor. And Mike's here as the CAO because both CAOs are sitting here. To me, that's how that would work, isn't that?
And to your point, Mike, we could adjust to have both CAOs. Right now, we don't, and we just wanted Mike here. So, but there was no harm in having both for the organization, because the reality is that anything we talk about is going to impact both organizations.
So just a quick thing too. At one time, the ACRD CAO wasn't available if they were on holidays. So our CAO becomes in charge, right? That's how the pecking order works. So I think that's really important. Maybe we should make an amendment and have both CAOs on the terms of reference. Do we need an emotion for that, or for an amendment?
That was my point. You're not on the list. So yeah, we make a motion, put you on the list. Great.
So I'll move that both the ACRD and the city of Port Alberni CAOs are on the terms of reference as members.
Okay, I have a motion by Councilor Solder, seconded by Director Cote. Do you have a question, Director Beck? Okay, any questions at all on this amendment? Okay, hearing none, can I call a vote on the amendment? All those in favor? Opposed? Yep. And we'll go back to Cynthia. Thank you for speaking. No, we can endorse the terms of reference as general. Okay, thank you. So can I have a motion? The motion by Councilor Solda, seconded by Susan, Director Roth, thank you. Any questions on the motion? Okay, all those in favor of the motion? All those opposed? Carried, thank you. And now we're down to reports. We have no reports. Late business, we have no late business. Question period. Do we have any people on, and have any people in the boardroom? Do you have people on Zoom?
There are no questions on Zoom and no questions received by email.
Thank you. That brings us to the last one, adjournment. Anybody so moved? Do I have a seconder? Thank you. All those in favor? Thank you. Meeting adjourned.
All right, thanks, folks. See you soon.
Thank you, guys. Have a wonderful afternoon.
You
Enjoy
too.
the weather while you can.
We'll take the rain and
Bye.
celebrate that too when it arrives.